Have you told your friends that you see ghosts?
Oh, absolutely not.
Gina Rodriguez returns in Not Dead Yet.
I'm back, baby.
Who is that?
Oh, she's the obituary writer.
And Brad Garrett joins the brilliant ensemble cast.
Titan, Maverick, Titan of all Mavericks. These are all words used to describe me.
Not Dead Yet. Season premiere. Tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hey, it's been a while since we've done this. Book club. Kylie, you've been reading books. I've been reading books. And once a month or thereabouts, we make a bit of a departure from parenting and just share, I don't know, life stuff. The things that we're reading, the things that we've been inspired by, or that we haven't, because we know that everyone loves a good book. Well, almost everyone loves a good book. So this is not going to be a surprise to you, but I have about 7 books that I can talk about from the last month and a half since we last recorded a book club podcast. How many have you got for us?
I've been really slow the last couple of months. I picked up a book. It was 628 pages
I'm
long.
looking at the book that you've got on the desk. Is that the one that you're going to talk about?
It is.
It's a, I don't know what the word is. It's a tome. It looks like it's heavy.
And so I think that may have had something to do with it.
Yeah, fair enough. Not to mention the fact that we're running a household with all these kids and we've become grandparents.
So I've got 2 this month.
Okay, 2. Well, why don't you go first and we'll go you, me. Let's hear about your first book.
So the first book I read was Kate Morton's Homecoming. This was the 628 pages.
Right.
It's like the Bible. It was massive.
Yeah.
And I was really excited to pick this book up.
Yeah.
But I was also really daunted by just how big it was.
Right.
And to be honest, while Kate has actually crafted a ridiculously enthralling and captivating story,
Yeah.
her beginning was actually quite confusing. And because of the space in my life, not being able to read it with any level of continuity or consistency meant that each time I picked it up, I kind of had to read back over what I'd read to kind of get a sense of where I was at and where she was going.
Sometimes an author makes you work a bit harder than you've got the capacity to work. It's not necessarily poor writing.
No, and I don't think it was. I think that literally, normally I would have a read every night, but this would often be, 4 or 5 days between.
Yeah, right. And
reads.
if you're taking that big of a gap, you kind of can't remember the names of the character or who's related to who and how.
And there's lots of different perspectives that she's writing from. So kind of taking it from all of those different perspectives got a little bit confusing because of the length of time span between each read. But in saying that, by the time I got to kind of the crux, once everything fell into place, I was so captivated. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to sleep. I just wanted to read.
I love that.
And find out what was happening. And not only that, she completely blew me out of the water. Every conceivable outcome I had, thought I knew, just went out the window. Okay. And it was none of them.
So in 30 seconds or less, what's the book about?
The book's set in the Adelaide Hills in the late 1950s, and it's a small town, and there is a family who is murdered on Christmas Eve. And so...
Sounds kind of morbid. So this is like a true crime kind of novel.
Yeah, it is.
But maybe it's not a true crime. Maybe it's a fiction crime.
Crime.
Yeah, but it's a crime novel.
Yeah, so there's obviously there's a dark side to it.
Oh, sounds like it.
But it's really a story about family history and how much the relationships that you have within your families determine your ability to want to protect the people you love. So it's one of those stories where it really kind of, I guess, taps into your consciousness and your sense of what's right and wrong and what you would do for the ones that you love.
Ooh, okay. Now, you were telling me a bit about this as we were going through it, and I think I'm going to add it to my list, my ever-expanding list of books to read, because it did sound really great. What are you going to give it out of 5?
Because it was so tricky, based on my personal experience, I have to give it a 3.5. I want to give it more. The story was fantastic, but it was just so hard for me to get into. Yeah. I don't actually think that's Kate's fault. I think it's mine, but based on my personal experience, that's where I'm going. Okay.
My first book, so there are so many that I want to talk about, but I'm not going to talk about all 7 or 8 that I read. I'm going to pick up on a book called Winners Take All. Winners Take All. It's by a guy with a surname that I'm going to get wrong. Please forgive me for being, for not knowing how to say it. His name is Anand Giridharadas. I think that I've said that right. Anand Giridharadas. And Winners Take All is a book that, it was really challenging for me. The subtitle is The Elite Charade of Changing the World. So this was a book recommended to me by a colleague who works at Oxford University, and he said, read this book, absolutely amazing. I read a review of it recently with a quote from the Simpsons movie that really sums up what this book is about. The quote is, quote, "I'm a rich man and wanted to give something back. Not the money, but something." And essentially what goes on here is Anand is a former McKinsey analyst. He's a New York Times correspondent. He's been all over the news media. He's been awarded this very, very prestigious Henry Crown Fellowship at Aspen, gets invited onto private planes amid discussions of drinking projects in Kenya and improved farm supply chains in India. He's given 2 TED Talks. And yet the whole time he's living this life, he's basically saying there is something the matter with this elite life. And essentially he's turning on everyone who's made a big deal about him. He's looking at philanthropy and the way the people who are so wealthy, the multi-millionaire and billionaire people across the planet, and how they act like they're wonderfully generous because they've got all this money and they're trying to get into philanthropy and do good and give back to the world. But they're doing it in a way that is a giant sweet-lipped lie. So he gets into the heavy stuff. Like he's talking about how when they talk about giving money, they talk about alleviating poverty, but they won't have conversations about inequality and the structures that support inequality. In other words, I've got lots of money, and so long as we don't change the power structure that makes sure that I keep all my money, I'm going to do everything that I need to do to make it look like I'm being very generous. But of course, I'm maintaining the system and the structure that facilitates my endless supply of huge sums of money so that I can keep on bringing it in and then just decide who I'm going to help, when I'm going to help them, and how I'm going to help them. It's a really heavy book.
So he's really talking about the fact that in order for systemic change to take place, we need to look at the very system that is creating the inequality.
Yeah, he's basically saying the system is wrong, the system is rigged, and the elites at the top are keeping it that way because they get to stay where they are. It's a blistering critique of the elite class, the political class. I'll give you an example of it. And this is a really political thing for me to say, but I'm very comfortable saying it. Just recently in the news, like about a month ago, Anthony Albanese's son made headlines because Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas, gave Albanese's son access to the Chairman's Lounge, this invite-only exclusive club that frequent flyers, cherry-picked, hand-picked frequent flyers get to go into. Now, I've got a friend who is in the level below that, the highest level you can get. And he got me into the lounge recently as he was visiting the airport at the same time as me. Instead of me going into the Virgin Lounge that I normally go to, I got to go into this, not the Chairman's, but the first class lounge that Qantas flyers get. This friend of mine, he flies internationally business class and first class all the time for work. That's his business pays for it. And when I stepped in there was a chef waiting for my order. I got to order the most incredible brisket with a side of whatever I wanted. I mean, and I'm sitting there going, this is not like the Virgin Lounge that I'm used to going into. And even that's kind of cool compared to everyone else who flies cattle class, right? And so I'm looking at this.
I can't believe you just called it cattle class.
Well, that's what people have called it for decades. But this is the crazy thing. The Prime Minister's son gets this exclusive invitation into the Chairman's Lounge, and there's no way he gets it except that he's the son of the PM. It's perks for the boys. It's that kind of idea. And here's what's really rotten about it. Nobody else in the political class made any noise about it because they've all got their noses in the trough. And if they start pointing fingers at Albanese and his son for taking advantage of a perk that this son did not earn in any way, that would mean that when they get an opportunity to be in power, they can't take those perks for themselves and their own families. So like I said, it's just this critique of the elite class and how they seek to use their wealth and their position and their power to look good in their philanthropy without changing the status quo, Really hard to read, really challenging with its views, and also frustrating because there was a lack of real solutions. But I'm really glad that I read it and I was really stretched by it. So the book is called Winners Take All by Anand Giridharadas. I hope I pronounced the name correctly.
And what are you going to give it?
Oh, I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5. No, actually, you know what? I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. I loved the challenge and I loved the critique. I thought it was good.
Good.
Good. Okay, let's talk about your second book, Kylie.
Well, my second book is called The Secret Life of You by Kerry Sackville. Now, I wanted to love this book.
Yeah, right.
I really wanted to love it.
I've read a lot of Kerry Sackville stuff. She's all over the internet. Like she publishes a lot and she's, I guess you'd call her an opinion writer.
Yeah, and so I guess that's probably where I'd start. She wrote it like she was an expert in the area, but she's actually just a person who's had an experience.
Okay.
And so as I read it, there were definitely things that I highlighted. There were definitely things that stood out to me.
You kept on stopping me from reading my books and saying, hey, I've got to read this to you. I've got to read that to you. So it obviously, there were things there that touched nerves for you and that you found useful.
Yeah, so her subtitle is How a Bit of Alone Time Can Change Your Life, Relationships and Maybe the World. And so she came to a point in her life where she recognized that she was living pretty much a life of distraction, with your phone being such a constant presence in your life and a constant draw of your attention.
Right.
She just realized that as a whole, she was actually not comfortable in just doing nothing. Like to be able to sit, we talk about mindfulness, to be able to sit in that place for so many of us is really uncomfortable. And as she started delving into it more kind of on her social networks, she realized that across the board, people were saying the things like, why would I spend time in my own head? Like, I don't want to know what's in there. Or that's a dark, scary place. I can't go there.
Got it.
Or, different things like that. And she just realized how we're living in this society where we actually in so many cases don't even know who we are.
Yeah,
because we're listening to other people's voices so much. We're just kind of trouting off other people's opinions, other people's thoughts around things. And we actually haven't taken the time to do the deep thinking about who we are and what we stand for and what we want out of our lives. We're just kind of just in the rat race.
I talk about doing the inner work, and it sounds like what she's highlighting is we live such busy lives and so superficially on our screens that we're not doing that inner work. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, and we lack intention about how we do things.
Okay, so The Secret Life of You by Kerry Sackville. What are you going to give it?
I'm going to give it a 2.5.
Oh, I was expecting a big score based on the way you spoke about it, but it didn't resonate for you. It wasn't deep enough, wasn't strong enough.
No, I think if she had have written it as a memoir and kind of just shared her experience, I probably would have enjoyed the process more. But I just felt like she was trying to write from a place of expertise.
You've been married to me too long.
Instead of just sharing her experience.
Sure.
And it just left me wanting, because having gone through this process for myself, and I mean, I've spent nearly 40 years of my life actually being afraid to be alone. I didn't think I could do it. And then finally challenging my own thought processes and putting myself in that situation, have found such a beautiful new lease in life and have come to know myself in a totally different way. So I wanted her to add to my story, but I don't think she did.
Okay. All right. Well, my last one, I'm going to be really sneaky. I want to tell you about the other books that I've read, but I'm only going to pick one. So I read another book called The Ideas Industry by Daniel Dresner. He's an academic. It's all about political science, thought leadership, economics. I didn't understand it well enough to take the message in. It probably was a 5-star book, but I only gave it 3 because I really didn't understand what I read, and I pushed through it for 2 weeks. It was such hard going. But anyone who's into economics, political science, and thought leadership, you might like The Ideas Industry. One of my favorite books, oh my goodness, just recently I interviewed Madonna King on the podcast. I don't know if you heard me talking with her about her brand new book, Saving Our Kids.
That was a great podcast.
It was a great interview, definitely worth going back and listening to it. But I when we did the interview, I hadn't had the opportunity to read the book. It only arrived the day before, and we were going to postpone it, but the book was coming out, and I really wanted to support Madonna and her work. I've now read the book. This book is the most important book Madonna King has ever written. I've got goosebumps talking about it. She's written Being 14. She's written Fathers and Daughters. She's written L Platers. I've got so many of her books on my shelf because she's prolific. But this book, Saving Our Kids, is about Task Force Argos and the devastating trade in children that happens online in terms of explicit content. She's got an inside channel into what the police are doing to try to stem the tide and capture predators. And this book is all about that. It is devastating. It is terrifying. It is so hard to read. But of all the books that I've ever read of Madonna King's, this one will remain seared in my mind in ways that the others don't. Not that the others weren't good, but this is her best by far from my perspective. 5 stars. Amazing. A couple of others really quickly. Jo Prendergast, she's a New Zealand psychiatrist. She's written a book called When Life Sucks. It's really for parents of teens who are going through all of the psychiatric kind of dramas. It was a good book. She did a good job. I've got her coming up on the podcast soon, so I won't say anything more about the book for now. You can hear her on the podcast soon. Last one that I'm going to mention is Jean Twangy, Professor Jean Twangy. We had her in the Smells Like Teen Spirit Summit, and she wrote a book called Generations. This is where we compare the boomers to Gen X to Gen Y, or Gen Y is also known now as millennials, if I'm remembering the book correctly, Gen Z and the brand new generation being raised. This was a really compelling book. Now, I'm not into the whole generational thing. I keep on talking about how there's so much diversity within each generation and how can you tar an entire generation with one broad brushstroke. I'm changing my tune after reading Jean Twangy's book. It is brilliant. 5 stars, Generations. Absolutely loved it. And I can't wait to tell you about the book that I'm reading right now. It's so good. I'm going to get the author on so that we can have him on the podcast. He lost 2 of his kids in a car accident while he and his wife were driving, and it's a book about the grief. And it is just profound. It's beautiful. Can't wait to tell you more about that. Hey, we really hope there's some books here that pique your interest and drag you into the depths of enjoying everything that books can be. We will include all the details about them in the show notes. Thanks for listening. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rollon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about the stuff we've talked about, check the show notes or visit us at happyfamilies.com.au for more about making your family happier.